Thank you very much. So many layers and resonance to that. It's beautiful. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Janine Theobald, and I am a member of the Board of Directors for the Victoria Multi-Faith Society, the VMS. And today's event, presented by Beth and Kate, Reconnect to the Healing Element in Religion, is sponsored by the VMS. And I personally am thrilled to be here. The statement on the poster is what brought me here today. By practicing your faith, you are by definition healing. I think that's a really true statement. So before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping items. The washrooms are up the stairs to my right there. The women's is on it'll be the left when you go up. Men's will be on the right. Please turn off your cell phones. And there are some evaluation forms on your chairs, and there's some pens over there at the table when you came in. So Beth and Kate would really appreciate if you could take the time to fill those out at the end of the presentation. And did I miss anybody with a handout on the way in? All right, I did well. If you need one, come to me, or I can, there's also some on the table there. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Beth Gibson. She lives here in Victoria. She holds a BA in Religious Studies from Memorial University. She manages the Christian Science Reading Room, and she also organizes public events and conferences under the auspices of the VMS and the Victoria Downtown Churches Association. She's also a co-chair of the Victoria Downtown Churches Association and has recently initiated the formation of a Victoria Faith Leaders Group. Kate Gibson Oswald, her sister, hails from Lake Country, BC, which is near Kelowna. She is a practitioner of Christian Science and has a full-time public healing practice. She's also a Celtic harpist, inspirational songwriter, and recording artist. Her background is in the arts, and she holds a BA in Fine Arts from Queen's University. So thank you all for coming, and Beth and Kate, thank you.
Turn my voice on, there we go. Thank you very much, Janine. And thank you to the Victoria Multi-Faith Society for sponsoring our talk today. And so I should just check in on the volume. How is the volume? Does that work for everybody? Is that good? Okay, good. Well, Kate and I are certainly delighted to be here with you today, this afternoon, to share, well, basically what we've been learning about this healing element in religion. And a spiritual health practitioner, now that's a modern term for chaplain, said it this way during a focus group that I was leading a few years ago on the subject of spirituality and health. And he said, all faiths have transformational power that can change an individual, that can get that person out of a rut to something better. All people can relate to this, and it enables us to do what we think we can't do. There is a power here to tap into. Well, the world needs this healing element and demands that religion demonstrate more of this healing capacity to establish justice, health, and harmony. So which leads us to our main point. Anyone can be a healer. If you're practicing your faith, you are by definition healing. So we wish to focus on being that healer to whatever degree, emerging from that holy ground of a relationship and connection to the divine, to God. And I'm going to use the term God today because it is the term that I'm accustomed to using, but I certainly acknowledge other terms. So being a healer then, less from the standpoint of being a trained this or a trained that, but rather tooled with unique features of religion, nurtured faith, prayer, meditation, and the authentic practice of religious principles. Now, I should just say that these words actually were from a CBC radio host, and she said these words at the end of an interview that she was having with Kate several years ago. And it's a statement that, in fact, became the catalyst for this presentation. And so, looking at this healing element, we also can think of medical and scientific studies, for example, that have been examining this connection between spirituality and well-being for years now. And I'm sure many of you have come across some of these studies that have been done. One of the most interesting ones that I've come across of late examined the relationship between belief in life after death and experiences of anxiety, depression, paranoia, obsession, compulsion, and phobia. And they surveyed about 1,400 American adults. And after controlling for several variables, they found a significant, what they call inverse relationship. So that means the greater the belief in life after death, the less the severity of those symptoms that I mentioned. But of course, as people of faith, we know that scientific studies is not where we learn about this connection between spirituality and well-being. This understanding has already been established within religion. So to illustrate this, I'll tell you a story about an interfaith group of military chaplains. So it was about 16 years ago, and Germany at that time was going through a particularly tough winter. And at that time, there was being organized between the German and United States armies field training exercises that were to go on in the middle of this winter for about 8 weeks, and including 8,000 soldiers. Now, before the training got started, because of the icy conditions and several other factors, the officers predicted an unusually high number of not only injuries, but accidental deaths. Well, when the Corps chaplain, that's the lead chaplain who was overseeing the spiritual care for this entire group, heard about these predictions, she felt that her group of chaplains could address those predictions, and particularly the fear. So she called together her team, and for what she called a spiritual safety briefing. So she suggested to them that there was no reason to accept that there needed to be a single fatality, and invited them to pray each day specifically for the safety of those soldiers. She also asked them to search their scriptures, sacred texts, songs, hymns, for assurances and praise of God's power to protect his people. As well, to look for the scriptural basis for not yielding to fear. And they agreed to embrace the idea of God's omnipotence and love for his children, and to later rejoin together to share what they had found. And so they did. They had a very inspiring couple hours together of sharing what they had discovered within their scriptures. And they agreed that if any challenges came up, they would call specifically for prayer out to all the chaplains. So Janet then briefed the generals and the leadership on this prayer duty. Well, the training began, and all was going well. No reports of accidents or injuries. Then one morning, the German general collapsed and was medically evacuated with predictions of a major challenge. So in response to that, Janet put out that call for specific prayer. And in a short time, the general was back. The doctors actually were unable to determine what it was that happened. So the training, though, continued for the remaining weeks. But despite those road conditions and that winter situation that was there was not even a single vehicle accident the corps surgeon took notice, and he felt that he was out of business because he hadn't even given out a single ice pack at all. The German general certainly took notice as well, to such a degree that he called Janet in to address the rest of the senior staff about what the chaplains were doing. And apparently then they refused to carry on any other exercises or training unless they had their duty chaplain along with them. But near the end of the 8 weeks, 2 incidences did occur, but I'll let you read those about that for yourself, because that's in your package, your handout, and it's in that story of the spiritual safety briefing, and you can find out how those incidences resolved. So isn't that just a great example, though, of how a group of people from different faiths can pull together and for such wonderful impact of safety and protection? But here we have it, though. Now we're at miracle. Miracle. A term that might make some of us feel uncomfortable, which is understandable. How do we get comfortable with something that seems so mysterious? But is miracle really as mysterious as it may appear? Well, everyone, of course, has to answer that for themselves. But I'm thinking that these chaplains must have come to some level of feeling and understanding that they were relying on something perceivable, tangible, reliable even, rather than something mysterious. Miracle. Well, what else can we learn about miracles? Well, the term miracle is an English term. It comes from the Latin root mirare. My Latin is bad, so I'm not sure that's how you pronounce it. But Latin mirare, meaning to wonder at. And interestingly enough, this is also the root for admire and mirror. And mirror image is something that we're going to be picking up on later. Now, different fields of study have their own take on the phenomena of miracle. Within scientific fields, such as psychology, quantum change is a term used. And within medical circles, sometimes spontaneous remission is used to avoid any religious connotations. We all know that by definition, miracles contradict physical laws, but it does beg us to consider, might they rather naturally align with spiritual divine law? Well, this is especially interesting to consider since miracles are a phenomena inherent in every world religion. And all we have to do is go to the supermarket aisle to experience it. Phew! It's a relief to know it's so easy. It was actually kind of fun looking on the internet to see how miracle was used. And I'm wondering if I can do a little bit of focus on that. Good? Slide, okay. All right. Very good. Well, here's an outline then for where we're going to go today. So my role is in part A, 3 main things that world religions share in common. And I do wish to say that we can certainly recognize what we have in common, but without acknowledging our unique differences. I certainly don't want to gloss over that. So first of all, we are going to identify characteristics of miracles. Then secondly, look at a rich tradition of healing and miracle accounts across the major world religions. And I'll be sharing some lovely stories. Now, the research that I'll largely be drawing upon is from an author, Kenneth Woodward. Now, he was the religion editor at Newsweek for 36 years. He also researched and wrote the Book of Miracles, which I have an image up there, titled The Meaning of Miracle Stories in Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam. Now, in your handouts, again, there is a bibliography, so this book is written there, so you can reference it there. So has anyone, by any chance, seen or heard of this book? Yeah, heard it? Okay. Oh, you got very good. Back. Very good. Okay. So what's compelling for me about this book is that in a single volume, it clearly lays out the miracle traditions that exist within those faiths, and that every founder accomplished healing and miracle and taught how to understand them, those characteristics. Plus, not only the founders, but their followers, who for centuries afterwards carried on their teachings and their healing works, albeit to differing degrees within each tradition. Now, I don't actually agree with all the conclusions that Woodward makes in his book, but I believe it's just a great go-to anthology if you're looking for these stories and the accounts. Now, he doesn't go too much into modern times, so most of my examples won't be from modern times. And he also doesn't include religions from the 19th century, Baha'i and Christian Science, which I'll be doing today. So I'll be drawing on other sources for those. Then the third category, which we'll be looking at, is a discovery of religious and spiritual principles shared in common across the world's major religions. Then after my part, we'll have a mini stretching break. Kate and I will swap. She'll come on up. And then Kate will illustrate how all of these shared elements work together for establishing health, harmony, justice, and peace. Okay, so on with defining characteristics of miracle. So the number one, the power is God's. Miracle reveals something important about reality God. It tells us something. 2, it's not magic. So it doesn't involve manipulation of matter. It's not the human mind. It's not willpower. And it's not to be sought or performed for their own sakes. Miracles invoke awe and wonder. They provide meaning and purpose to those involved. The experience is individual and may not have personal meaning to others. The community is often involved, so you can see shifts in scale towards peace, justice, and harmony. Miracles can include a cosmic vision. And finally, they are prominent within sacred texts. So, we'll move on then to the rich history of healing and miracle, and we're going to proceed through chronologically. So beginning with Moses, and here are some basic facts. So as I introduce each founder, I'll include a number of basic facts for that person, as well as the miracle accounts, like which books they come from. So Moses. So the characteristics that we've just discussed are very much evident in Moses' miracles. God is the source of the miracle. God's presence and protection is very much part, for example, of the story of Moses leading the Hebrews out of slavery, parting the Red Sea for their escape. This miracle is certainly experienced by the whole community, although accomplished by Moses. And compassion, we're going to see, is also a characteristic of the founders in their healing work. And for example, with Moses, of providing drinkable water for the people on their journey and advocating for the people for their need for food. And Moses makes it clear that his works were distinct from those of the Egyptian wonder workers, or in other words, distinct from magic. So I've just listed a few over the centuries of the Jewish sages that came after Moses. Woodward calls this period of miracle kind of a classic period of miracles. Now, so I've listed a few people here, but I'll tell you about Hanina, if I'm pronouncing. I'm sure I'm not getting many of these names right, so apologies. So he was known for leading a righteous life. And in the village near where he lived, there was a water snake that had been injuring people. And villagers then came to Hanina about this and appealed to him for help. So he asks where the nest is. So he goes there and he puts his heel into the opening of the nest. The snake bites him. The snake dies. The message he delivers to the people is, see, it is not the water snake that kills. Sin kills. Krishna from Hinduism. So Krishna's miracles. Again, we have the cosmic ones and the ones that show compassion. Now, in contrast to the more down-to-earth accomplishments of Moses, Krishna's stories have a far more cosmic feel to them, but along with the compassion. So Krishna's mother looks inside his mouth and sees the universe. Then he multiplies his human form to supply each woman in a circle dance to have a partner in that dance of love. Now Woodward says, miracles of the Hindu gods are events that reveal something about the nature of the world as mere appearance or illusion. These stories tell us there are no natural laws to be suspended to make room for the miraculous. For those who have eyes to see, miracles happen all the time because all that is of God. So a few listed here from over the centuries. Then we have the story of Shankara. Now one day during the rainy season, Shankara's guru was sitting meditating in a cave. Now the rains came, and with the rains the river was swelling up, rising higher, threatening to drown the guru. Now in response, Shankara quickly grabs his begging bowl, consecrates it again quickly, and places it at the entrance to the cave. And the floodwaters flow into the bowl, saving not only the guru, but 2 villages on either side of the river. So Siddhartha Gautama from Buddhism. And I'll let you read. So the Buddha overcomes needs of the body for food and shelter from the cold and heat, shows knowledge without having received instruction, and then after his enlightenment, instant transport of the body from place to place. And then there's a story about the elephant. So apparently an antagonistic cousin of the Buddha bribes the owner of a fierce elephant to have that elephant charge at the Buddha. So the Buddha, however, meets that charging elephant with compassion and love, and the elephant is subdued and comes to a standstill before him. Now Buddha instructs his monks not to go about displaying miraculous powers before lay audiences, not to make great exhibitions. Enlightenment itself is the miracle. Yet miraculous powers themselves do promote enlightenment, promote the path out of suffering. Now the Buddhist saints. So some examples here of being protected from fire and boiling water, transported to other worlds and back, reading minds of others, appearing, disappearing, cloning themselves, walking around the sky. And Jesus from Christianity. Now, Jesus is recognized by several world religions to have been a master healer. In the book of the Gospel of Mark, for example, over 50% of the content of that book is Jesus' miracle and healing accounts. So we have different categories for some of his healing and miracle works: protection and authority, walking on water, stilling storms, and providing food and water. Multiplies food to feed thousands, turns water to wine, and then cures of the body, lifts fever, casts out mental illness, cleanses leprosy, frees paralysis, restores a withered hand, raises the dead, cures at a distance. And the story of a woman who had been hemorrhaging for several years. And in this story, we have Jesus walking through a crowd of people, large crowd, and a woman was there who had been bleeding for about 12 years. She had spent a lot of her money on treatments, but instead was growing worse. When she heard about Jesus, she thought to herself, if I could just touch the cloak of his garment, or the edge of his garment, I could be healed. So she came up behind him in that press of people and touched his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt free from that suffering. Jesus, feeling something had happened, stopped and turns to her and says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed of your suffering." Now it is written that he said, "I tell you the truth, anyone who believes in me will do the same works I have done, and even greater works." So for the first 300 years after Jesus, healing does continue with quite an abundance, and it appeared quite integral to Christianity. But then it starts to dramatically decline. No one has ever really known the reason for that, other than one researcher did note that during that time, church doctrine was beginning to be outlined in greater detail. But nevertheless, there were certainly individual men and women throughout the centuries, largely from monastic communities, with miracles certainly recorded to their name. So those who wrote on the subject continued to teach that miracle must be distinguished from magic and manipulation of any kind, not to boast or be proud of such works, not as signs of personal power, but as signs of compassion and virtue. Eventually, with the Catholic Church, miracles are defined for canonization purposes, but within Protestantism comes the general rejection of miracles, as too much emphasis at that time was being placed on relics of the saints for their healing power. However, modern attitudes are certainly changing within Protestantism towards miracle. So Muhammad from Islam. So Muhammad's miracles and healings, again, divided them into categories. So we have the providing of rain when it's needed, water and food, they're like Jesus. Supplying those to troops. He causes a barren female sheep to provide milk for her young, and multiplies dates, food, to pay a young man's debts. And then also cures to the body, restores an eye, or eye sickness to health, restores a foot to health. And also, there was an account of a man who had received a blow to the face, from which one of his eyes was dislodged from its socket. And Muhammad comes across this man and himself takes the eye and puts it back into place, with that eye thereafter being the better of the two. Now, in one set of sacred writings, Muhammad is shown to accept the miracles of Moses, the prophets, and Jesus, and works them himself. But it's written in the Quran caution does being demanded to. If he were to work any, he is reported to have said, his opponents would not have believed him anyway. The Quran itself is considered a miracle, with healing in its pages. And as the Quran reads, "And we sent down in the Quran such things that have healing and mercy for the believers." Now, after Muhammad, we largely find the works of healing and miracle with the Sufis. That's the mystical arm of Islam. So those desiring to experience God firsthand in the here and now. And warnings do continue to be taught, along with how to regard miracle. Miracle is an experience of God that is taught, but can be a snare on the path to understanding God. So Habib protects another Sufi from harm and walks on water. That story of protection, that other Sufi was being persecuted and harmed by a large mob, and he came to his aid. So, Baha'u'llah from Baha'i. So moving into the 19th century, I'll say a little bit more about the two 19th century founders that I'll be covering, because even though they're more modern, there seems to be less known about them. So Baha'u'llah was born into a Shia Muslim family of nobility, the son of a wealthy government minister. However, as a young man, he chose not to follow the livelihood of his father, eventually becoming a follower of the Bab, who was preaching a new interpretation of the Quran. He suffered persecution throughout his life, with his initial revelation coming during imprisonment. And in fact, the majority of his writings were written over a period of 24 years while in prison in Israel. He understood himself to be the fulfillment of the Bab's promise that God would send another messenger. Now, Baha'u'llah accomplished what one source said, numerous accounts of what could be called miracles. Yet, I've not been able to find or access any stories. And likely because he continues in that classical tradition to be wary of how miracle is going to be interpreted by the masses, and requests followers not to stress such events, nor use them to teach the faith, as they have significance as private events between the individuals involved. Baha'u'llah writes, "The healer of all thine ills is remembrance of me, forget it not. Make my love thy treasure, and cherish it even as thy very sight and life. Well is it with the physician who cureth ailments in my hallowed and dearly cherished name." Now his successor and son, Abdul Baha, has a few miracles attributed to him. For example, healing a man of pain, boils, and abscesses, and prevents a suicide by appearing to a Baha'i follower with a vision, with instructions to visit another Baha'i at just the right moment, with just the right needed gifts to prevent that act. Now, Abdul was asked a question. And the question was, some people heal the sick by spiritual means, that is to say, without medicine. How is this? And he answers by giving a list of methods that involve human involvement or manipulation, hypnotism, willpower, faith healing, magnetic and energy healing. And then he says, but the fourth kind of healing is produced through the power of the Holy Spirit, This does not depend on contact, nor on sight, nor upon presence. It is not dependent upon any condition, whether the disease be light or severe, whether there be a contact of bodies or not, whether a personal connection be established between the sick person and the healer or not. This healing takes place through the power of the Holy Spirit. Now, Mary Baker from Christian Science. Now, Mary Baker was born into a farming family and raised as a Calvinist Christian. Through the course of her life, she overcame the disadvantages of simply being a woman of her day, as well as persecution, poverty, and illness, to become, first and foremost, a Christian healer, then a lecturer, author, teacher, and founder of a worldwide church, the First Church of Christ Scientist. Through Bible study and revelation, she herself experienced a profound physical cure. This motivated her to study the Bible even more in depth, to understand how she had been healed, and whether spiritual healing could be replicated and practiced consistently. She named her discovery Christian Science. Now, all of her documented healings have, in fact, now been published. It's in a book called Christian Healer. And these include many types of disease, including ones considered to be incurable, addictions, insanity, and reformation of character. Now, she always points back to Jesus and to his model. He always backed up his teaching about God with demonstrating God's presence and power for good in ordinary lives. She too warns against human willpower, any form of manipulation, and human faith healing. She also stresses that the important healing is not the physical one. In fact, it is merely a byproduct. The real healing is the purifying and reformation of heart and mind. And she writes, "There is a law of God applicable to healing, and it is a spiritual law instead of material. God will heal the sick through man whenever man is governed by God." With students of Christian Science, the Bible and Mary Baker Eddy's writings are their textbooks for healing through prayer. Accounts of healing, both anecdotal and medically verified, continue to be published in weekly and monthly magazines since 1888. Healings in areas such as relationships, employment, finances, and health in body, mind, and spirit. As a Christian Scientist myself, I'm grateful for the actual spiritual healings that I've experienced over the years. It's not always easy, but it's rewarding. Well, anyone can be a healer. If you're practicing your faith, you are by definition healing. And we've just seen what a wonderful tradition in these major world religions of that healing element. I certainly have found it very affirming and inspiring to have discovered that healing element within all these other faith traditions. So now, let's take a look at those principles that we share in common. We've discovered these principles in this little book. It's called Oneness, Great Principles Shared by All Religions by Jeffrey Moses. And again, it is listed in your bibliography, so you'll have the information there. So this book includes an introduction by the Dalai Lama. Has anyone seen this book? Kate has! Yay! I'm so grateful you have. Over here, certainly, oh good, good. So we have a few. Well, you're all that much more knowledgeable now. about this book? Well, Jeffrey Moses says it best in his own introduction. He says, "This book is the result of research that took place over many years. There are numerous volumes of scriptures for many of the world's religions, each with varying translations, the majority in archaic and complex language. Yet as I read through these scriptures, the universally familiar sayings jumped forth. Each, when discovered, was like a nugget that seemed to have been waiting for centuries to be uncovered and directly compared to similar expressions in other religions." As most of you perhaps know about that universal golden rule, which is in fact very similarly stated across the religions, well, he found 63 more above and beyond the golden rule. And as Moses says, that likely this list will continue to grow. So as Kate and I studied this book, we discovered three main categories for these principles. The foundational ones that speak of the nature of God. Those principles, for example, are God is love. God created all things. Then, based on those foundational principles, are the principles that are God's relationship to humanity. For example, God is found in the heart, and there are many paths to God. The third type guides man's relationship with man. For example, love your neighbor, honor your father and mother, and certainly by majority, the principles are in this third category. So since discovering this book a few years ago, Kate and I have certainly been paying attention to these principles as important to the practice of our own faith. And you know, it's okay to understand and practice these principles differently, because we will across the faiths. They're from God, and they're moving us forward. So we invite you to look into your scriptures to find these 64 principles. And that list is included in your packet. So we'll have a look now at some of these principles. And the way Jeffrey Moses lays out his book is he provides a principle. He talks a little bit about that principle just so you can kind of understand what he's aiming and getting at with that principle. And that only takes up about a page. And then he just simply provides the scriptural sentence or two, a paragraph from each sacred scripture from each of the world religions, and lets the scriptures speak for themselves. And so we'll see those. Just before we move on to that, though, I should say that you will see the word man. That is a generic term, meaning both male and female. So we're not meaning to be sexist. So as we read this sampling of principles and the scriptures, Kate is going to accompany us on harp. So please enjoy and celebrate what we share in common.
Everybody see the screen?
So we invite you now to have a little mini break. It's not a very long break, but a mini one, to share with your neighbor, someone sitting beside you, something that is a favorite idea from what you've heard so far. And certainly welcome to just stand up and stretch, but we'll just be back in about 3 minutes.